of the Institute or confronts accusations by the sole survivor of atrocities committed by the Institute, he is fully unable to speak openly and honestly about the Institute's actions. Father will comment on the Commonwealth Provisional Government, or CPG, with the CPG being an attempt by groups in the Commonwealth to form a unified government. The Institute at the time was a part of these talks. Frustrated that little progress was made because of a lack of unity amongst the participants, and all talks and attempts to create a large governing body were halted when the Institute sent a synth to assassinate all members of the CPG. Although this event happened far before Father was the director of the Institute, this is how he explains what happened.
The Institute tried to help create a stabilized Commonwealth government. It ended in bickering, infighting. It was a disaster. No. We look after our
Stupid blue screen.
Wait, that's it? That is all he says about the CPG? Now, was there disagreement and infighting? Yes. But then what happened, Father? Sending a synth to murder everyone that was part of the CPG is a huge omission when recounting the history of the CPG and how the Institute was involved. It's like referring to the Vietnam War as a colonial issue between France and Vietnam, without mentioning anything of the United States' involvement. The Institute killing everyone is a pretty important detail, and it is obvious
Here,
that
doggy, I'll send you the area
purposefully
with more
misrepresenting
friends.
the events to try and cause the sole survivor to question the things
See
that
if
they
you
have
got
heard
anything
on the surface. Father will defend the random acts of violence of
Grab
sins,
anything
like the
useful.
broken mask incident, by saying things like,
Unfortunately, no
Check it out.
advancement comes without occasional setbacks.
or,
None have any true claim to nobility in this world.
Go check that out.
Those
See
days
if there's
are
anything
gone,
there.
but we are not the monsters we have been cast as.
Father completely avoids accurately representing the missteps of the Institute, rather than being honest and acknowledging the things that they have done in a matter-of-fact way. He never recounts the events as they actually happened. When Father is forced to admit that the Institute has done some terrible things, he instantly pivots to a whataboutism. When the sole survivor tells Father that the Institute has done horrible things, this is how Sean responds.
Yes, well, the world is not what it used to be. What about the people you've aided in order to get here? What atrocities have they committed?
Father's intellectual dishonesty blinds
Right.
him to be able to even admit in a matter-of-fact way what has taken place and where the Institute has gone over the line. This is interesting, though, because he had no problem speaking of the death of his own parent in such a detached manner. One of the first goals that Father has when meeting the sole survivor for the first time is to convince them that everything they had been told about the Institute by surface dwellers was a lie. Like this quote during the very first discussion.
I can only imagine what you've heard, what you think of us. I'd like to show you that you may have the wrong impression. It has never been easy, and our actions are often misinterpreted by those above ground.
Father is well aware of the reputation of the Institute above ground, no doubt at least partly due to their impressive intelligence network of watchers, synth infiltrators, and informants. Father routinely insists that the Institute is misunderstood, and their actions are misinterpreted by those on the surface. If asked by the sole survivor why Father even cares, since the Institute is sequestered away from the rest of the
It does matter, though. If everyone sees the Institute as a villain, dangerous forces could align against us. If we can put the lie to such assumptions, we diminish that threat. We might diminish that danger by correcting the false perception that we intend some great harm to mankind.
So, according to Father, the Institute is misunderstood by many on the surface, and it is important that this misunderstanding be corrected for the good of the Institute. By correcting the record as he sees it, he keeps groups on the surface from uniting against the Institute and
He knows he's doing
becoming a
something
legitimate
wrong.
threat. However, he directly contradicts his own statements in another conversation with the sole survivor. Father says,
The Institute. It's important. It really is humanity's best hope for the future, no matter what those above ground might think of us.
If the Soul Survivor responds by saying, it doesn't matter what they think, it only matters what you do, Father admits that he agrees by saying, I am glad we see it the same way. That completely invalidates his earlier statements where he was insisting that the surface had a misinformed view of the Institute, and that this poor view of the Institute was important to rectify. Likewise, it is not just this one statement that shows how Father feigns concern for the Institute's image among the surface dwellers. The Institute is still replacing people in the Commonwealth, as evidenced by the Art random encounter, where it is very obvious the Institute is still actively replacing surface dwellers, or convincing, and I put that in heavy air quotes, smart people to join the Institute, like in the case of Mr. Wallace, who holed himself up in his home and paid mercenaries, or called on Minutemen to help protect him. The Institute refuses to take no for an answer, and Mr. Wallace either is forced to join the Institute, or he dies. Another instance of the Institute acting deceitfully toward the surface dwellers is when Roger Warwick, the patriarch of the Warwick family, was replaced with a synth so that the Bioscience Division can run experiments on crops and the effects of ambient radiation on them. Roger was abducted, tortured, and the last step of the project as outlined by the Bioscience Division is to purge all evidence of their tests, which seems to imply the destruction of the settlement and the death. Father's statements regarding how the Institute is maligned by the surface. In fact, Father's own explicit agreement with the Soul Survivor statement that it doesn't matter what the surface thinks, only what you, meaning Father, does, is the one statement that actually matches the actions of the Institute under Father's guidance. He doesn't actually care that the surface fears the Institute and considers it the boogeyman of the Commonwealth. What Father does do and approves of is violent, harmful, and deceitful to the Commonwealth, reinforcing their image as monsters. And that they aren't the awful people that they're made out to be is intentional deceit on the part of Father to attempt to ingratiate the Soul Survivor with himself and the Institute. Father's dishonesty and hypocrisy shines through yet again with the topic of Kellogg, the Institute's long-standing above-ground operative. Although Kellogg is first seen as a cold killer in the game's introduction, we come to find that he's a bit more nuanced, a jaded and broken man whose talents as a mercenary and lack of empathy and humanity is being abused by the Institute. Father agrees that the Institute took advantage of his vicious nature and tells the player that he only learned at the depth of Kellogg's violent nature after he had become director. Father even considers the death of Kellogg at the hands of the Soul Survivor as a form of personal revenge for the death of his deceased parent. Yet even though Father readily admits that the Institute...
I don't know why I have not thought about that. Why would Father be supportive of Kellogg even after Kellogg killed his parent?
His death was a form of justice. Father unleashed Kellogg and a group of synths to massacre an entire settlement because they thought it had information that they wanted. University Point is a location that by the time the player explores it in 2287 is nothing but a bunch of empty market stalls, destroyed buildings, and some remaining hostile synths. The story unravels as the player goes deeper into the settlement, but this empty and destroyed place once housed an entire bustling community, and when one extremely intelligent young woman found pre-war research on the creation of efficient nuclear reactor technology, she tried to sell the information to passing caravans. News of the discovery made it to the Institute through their network of informants, and Kellogg and a team were dispatched to go recover the research. It all ended in bloodshed and destruction, as things usually did with Kellogg, and all this happened under the direction of Father. While he does not ever discuss what happened at University Point himself, we know for a fact that Father was director of the Institute when these things unfolded. The young woman, Jacqueline Spencer, found the research in August of 2285, which was recorded in a terminal entry. The oldest known date for Father being director is July of 2285, just a month prior, again due to a personal terminal entry in the director's quarters. The actions at University Point lay bare Father's hypocrisy in several ways, and is probably the best single example of his dishonesty. Father used Kellogg, someone who he held a personal grudge against, who he acknowledges was a vicious person who directly caused an extraordinary amount of suffering, and with full knowledge of what Kellogg has done and was willing to do. When the sole survivor has a chance to directly confront Father about using a so-called psychopath, Father responds with,
"Would you have preferred that I turned him loose on the Commonwealth? At least keeping him on a short leash kept the collateral damage to a minimum."
Wow.
This is awful justification, since if Father really did
turn him off, he did kind of turn him off on the leash.
Institute, he had the authority to stop using Kellogg. With how much confidence the Institute puts in their coursers, a wildly unpredictable surface operator seems entirely unnecessary, and yet Father not only whitewashes previous incidents, he justifies the use of Kellogg by claiming to be doing the Commonwealth a favor by keeping him on a metaphorical short leash, all the while having been a victim of Kellogg's ruthless methods and harboring resentment for it. The events of
what's controlling Kellogg from massacring the entire person,
the entire settlement, the image of the Commonwealth, are true. While he goes to great effort to let the sole survivor know that the surface has the wrong impression of the Institute, he approves the mission to University Point, which predictably ends with brutality and death, and best of all, it is widely known that the settlement was destroyed by synths. One of the Diamond City guards can be overheard talking to another, saying,
"I'm telling you, it ain't just a story. University Point, that settlement on the coast, wiped out by synths."
Father doesn't really care about what the surface thinks of the Institute, to a certain point. As long as the negative image of the Institute doesn't coalesce into a unified threat, per his own words, then he doesn't care how people perceive the Institute. He also doesn't care what has to be done and how much suffering has to be inflicted on others to advance the Institute's goals. As long as whatever happens serves the immediate and future needs of the Institute, he will rationalize, hand wave away, and give performative, hollow speech to keep others from becoming too outraged. This is most clearly seen in how Father interacts with the sole survivor and reacts to being directly confronted with inconvenient questions. Since it seems clear that all this bold dishonesty is solely in the pursuit of bettering the Institute and pushing towards fulfilling the organization's goals,
I'll take a look.
what are those goals exactly? The Institute is rather infamous at this point for having nebulous goals, and this is yet another example of Father purposefully obfuscating the truth in order to serve the Institute. I am not necessarily referring to goals like the completion of Phase 3, which has the objective of getting the Institute's new reactor online so that they have ample power for years to come. I'm referring to the entire point of the Institute itself, and why it creates Gen 3 synths, why they have such an expansive
Stupid math. I hate this math.
And why they increase the surface so often and drastically. Father is eager to tell the Soul Survivor the Institute's motto, mankind redefined. That is clever and has a nice ring to it. The Institute's marketing department mean. Has the Institute fundamentally changed man? No. Has the Institute changed mankind itself? It doesn't appear so unless we consider the creation of Gen 3 synths as expanding mankind to include these new synthetic brethren, but no, the Institute rejects any notion of synths being people. Is it merely an empty platitude? I would argue no, because the change that is intended for mankind is not related to synths or cybernetic implants or transformative technology that could allow humanity to better adapt and survive the new post-war world. It is simply referring to the Institute being in charge. That's it. How do we know this? It's rather simple. Just listen to what Father says and watch what the Institute does. Father will tell the Soul Survivor that the Institute has been dedicated to the survival of humanity for over 100 years. How have they been helping humanity?
Exactly.
Have they been helping neutralize threats on the surface? Have they come up with some technology that cleans up radiation? Have they been aiding the surface with food insecurity by giving away surplus food? No, none of that. They have been dedicated to developing the molecular relay so that they could hide better from the surface, dead-end FEV experimentation that releases super mutants on the surface, and making robots that can do the manual work that they don't want to do. In their view, the surface is not part of humanity. It is a dead and desolate place with a doomed populace.
This just confirms the truth I've always known. The Commonwealth is dead. There's no future here.
The Institute apparently is humanity, and that ultimate goal that Father spoke of before was for humanity, aka the Institute, to retake and reshape the Commonwealth and beyond. Nowhere is this made more clear than when the player has helped the Institute by completing several missions and finishing Phase 3. Father tells the Soul Survivor,
"There's been too much posturing by too many groups. The world needs to know that we are in power and the Commonwealth is ours."
Shortly afterwards, the Soul Survivor is given a script, which reads as,
"Our superior technology represents the best hope for the Commonwealth. Today, we activate our nuclear reactor, ensuring that we will persevere long after the world above ground has ceased to exist, ensuring that mankind has a future. We have no desire to interfere in the unimportant details of your daily lives. We simply insist that you do not interfere with the Institute's operations. To do so would result in dire consequences. You may rest easy. Know that the future is in safe hands, that mankind will thrive under our guidance."
In no uncertain terms, it is declared that the Institute, through their technology, will carry mankind forward. And again, let me remind you that when they say humanity, they mean themselves. The Institute is now in charge, and if you try and stop that, they will hurt you. This is and has been the goal of the Institute for some time now, at least since 2230, when they stopped cooperating with the surface and destroyed the best chance the Commonwealth had for for coming together and unifying under a government. What is curious is that this and all other lies that we have covered so far are always espoused. No one drops the charade and speaks plainly about the real goals of the Institute, even after the sole survivor becomes the director. At no point does Father, or anyone else for that matter, actually acknowledge their obfuscation. Never does Father tell the sole survivor, "I know I said this, but this is how it really is." Now, some might argue that all this dishonesty, being in the service of the Institute, is actually a good thing for the director of the organization to do. After all, shouldn't his highest priority be for the good and advancement of the Institute? I would argue that this is a pattern of behavior that is overall destructive, as every lie incurs a debt to the truth that at one point will come due, and as I will show later on, completely contradicts more of what Father does. However, there is one more lie that Father espouses that contradicts a rigidly enforced belief that undergirds the entirety of the Gen 3 synth program. Father does not actually believe that synths are machines. The belief that synths are machines is hugely important, as it is the belief that causes the Railroad to be diametrically opposed to the Institute, and it is how the Institute can justify the creation and use of synths and all the hard labor that makes sure that the cogs of the Institute continue to turn. The Synth Sean project that I mentioned earlier is the point where Father seems to finally break away from the dominant Institute belief. After Father's passing, the sole survivor can come into possession of a holotape where Father leaves his last message. One where he asks the sole survivor to take care of Synth Sean, and where Father refers to Synth Sean as a boy.
I have no reason to believe that you'll honor the request I'm about to make, but I feel compelled to try anyway. This synth, this boy, he deserves more.
The same holotape will have a different message if the player chooses to side with the Institute in the end, and part of the holotape message will say,
"Both he and you deserve a chance to be a family."
Calling Synth Sean a boy and considering the sole survivor and Synth Sean together a family is Father flat out admitting that, at least in his dying moments, that he does not believe that synths are just machines. It is highly doubtful that he believes synths were just machines his entire life up until the last moments before his passing. It is likely that he was harboring doubts and beliefs deep down for a while. To have the director of the Institute concede one of the greatest points of contention in the entire game, to essentially be agreeing with their adversary, the Railroad, is not to be understated. Saying such things out loud in the Institute is dangerous. Multiple times we hear of people telling each other that saying such things can land them in trouble. Insisting that Gen 3 synths are only machines gave the Institute justification for creating them, using them as manual labor, and having complete control over them, even changing their appearance and memories. As soon as the Institute acknowledges that synths are indeed sentient, suddenly those practices become indefensibly unethical. Although all other lies were to justify the dirty work that needed to be done for the Institute, this one could actually be fatal to the organization as a whole, especially coming from the director. All of these examples are not even all the contradictions between what Father says and what he does, but rather the most poignant examples to illustrate the depth to which Father is willing to lie in order to manipulate and save face for the sake of the Institute, but also risk the image of the Institute on the surface and undermine their entire Generation 3 synth program, making him unfit to lead the Institute. His lies are largely responsible for the general confusion amongst players and the fanbase about the goal and objectives of the Institute, since he both determines the actions of the Institute and is the primary source of information into the inner workings of the faction.
Do you want free crystals sent to you every month? Yes.
Meth crystals?
Free every
Meth crystals. Rust, Rust Devils. That's just your friend with his bomb. I have to do all that some stuff again.
Is exempt from personal problems, be they small and largely inconsequential, or large with significant impacts on others. Father is no exception. However, some of his personal faults or flaws, or however you want to describe them, do have a substantial effect on the Institute. This once again shows that Father, as acting director, is overall a detriment to the Institute and largely to blame for their conflicting words and actions. Father struggles with feeling or understanding a range of emotions. He admits as much when talking to the sole survivor about feelings of anger, vengeance, and loss associated with the death of his deceased parent.
I'm afraid I have very little experience with those emotions, having lived my life within the Institute.
This is rather understandable, given the Institute's focus on scientific advancement above all else, but has a serious impact on Father's ability to work through
Did you say something about drugs?
emotions, which expresses itself in ways that are overall harmful to the Institute. The biggest challenge that Father grapples with revolves around a desire on his part to be a part of a family with the sole survivor. His familial circumstances in the Institute are unknown, but it is obvious that whatever he had growing up in the Institute was insufficient. Father expresses his feelings pertaining to learning about the circumstances of his background by saying,
For many years, I never questioned who my parents were. I accepted my situation, and that was that. With old age comes regret, and asking what if more often. But what matters now is that you and I have a chance to begin again.
It is obvious that as Father got older and likely
Might as well not go with Institute. I mean, your son's gonna die anyway.
Cancer, he felt compelled to do the only thing he could to answer his what if questions and growing regrets. He sent the order to release the sole survivor. Upon awakening from the cryogenic slumber, the sole survivor has really only a few simple goals: avenge their murdered spouse and find their missing child. Even for players that choose to spend the next 100 hours grinding for legendaries and settlement building, the sole survivor will eventually follow the decades-old trail, with the real big break coming when Conrad Kellogg is confronted in Fort Strong. Kellogg must die. There is, unfortunately, no other choice in the matter. But this event is the first of several that show that this decision by Father to release the sole survivor seriously jeopardizes the Institute and its capabilities. It was established that Father released the sole survivor as part of some kind of experiment. But when asked why Father chose now of all times to release the sole survivor, he says,
Until I became director, I had no idea you were there. And after, there was initially no logical reason to do so. Certainly it was no longer necessary to keep you suspended. I suppose I wanted to see what would happen. An experiment of sorts. I had no idea what kind of man you were, you see. Would the Commonwealth corrupt you, as it has everything else? Would you even survive? Perhaps most curious to me, would you, after all this time, attempt to find me? And now I know the answer.
It is important to ask exactly how Father expected the sole survivor to find him when they had hidden themselves away so well that no one on the surface, except for Brian Virgil, knows how to get in. A key clue comes when Father insinuates that the confrontation between the sole survivor and Kellogg was purposeful and
I'm
planned.
killing these swarm bots.
It's no coincidence your path crossed his. It seemed a fitting way to allow you, us, to have some amount of revenge.
Besides the obvious problematic logic of guiding his only parent, who he was deep down wanting to finally meet, to the most dangerous man in the entire Commonwealth, when looking at things from the Institute's point of view, losing their most important surface asset is a setback. Even if we consider that Father's long-standing issues with Kellogg, due to what he did to his parent and other known atrocities, provided a convenient excuse for Father to eventually let him go, so to speak, this appears to be a unilateral decision, since it is unlikely anyone else in the Institute cared about orchestrating a complicated and hidden operation to lead the sole survivor, of all people, to Kellogg. The death of Kellogg may have been Father's way of ridding himself of a resource that he apparently had a level of disdain for, even while fully exploiting Kellogg's particular set of skills. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Regardless, it set a chain of events in motion. The cybernetic implant recovered from Kellogg led to exploring some of Kellogg's memories and discovering that the Institute uses teleportation, a tightly held secret that no one else outside of the Institute knew. The memories also revealed the existence of Virgil, the now escaped former Institute scientist that grew sick of the dead-end FEV experimentation and destroyed the lab to escape. The sole survivor eventually tracks down Virgil, where a deal is struck. Virgil will help the sole survivor use the molecular relay, aka teleportation, to get into the Institute. If the sole survivor will get an experimental serum that will return Virgil to his human form. To infiltrate the Institute, a Courser chip, which interfaces with the molecular relay signal, must be obtained, and this is only done by killing the Courser. Coursers are the Institute's elite Generation 3 synths, and their enhanced capabilities are used to great effect in tracking down runaway synths and bringing them back to the Institute. On his way to recover a runaway synth, only to be stopped short by the sole survivor, who kills him to take his Courser chip. So after killing yet another important Institute asset, Virgil uses the chip to reverse engineer the relay technology, and the sole survivor has to use the help of one of three factions: the Brotherhood of Steel, the Railroad, or the Minutemen, all of which oppose the Institute, with the Brotherhood and Railroad diametrically opposed to the Institute and seeking their destruction.
I love having the Overseer's Guardian. I miss you, my baby girl.
All of this results in a very closed-off first encounter with Synth Sean and Father. Seriously, to have the sole survivor meet Synth Sean under the impression that Synth Sean was the real Sean, the sole survivor was thawed out, somehow guided to fight and kill the Institute's main mercenary, track down and kill a valuable Courser, have the relay technology reverse engineered by a former Institute member, and then have an enemy faction participate in the construction of the signal interceptor. I repeat, an enemy faction is given the reverse engineered technology to assist the sole survivor in penetrating the Institute. Once inside the Institute, through a series of tunnels and doors that seem to be constructed for the sole purpose of isolating the sole survivor from the rest of the Institute, the player is led directly to his encounter with the Seans. Through all of this, valuable and capable Institute assets are lost. Their technology and security is jeopardized and needlessly compromised so that Father can meet the sole survivor and see how his pet project, Synth Sean, reacts. The Synth Sean project is also an example of Father's own personal issues negatively impacting the Institute. We covered how the researchers on the project questioned the purpose of the project in the first place, especially as it was meant to produce a synth that looked and acted exactly as Father did when he was around 10 years old. Father pulled some of the top minds in the Institute, including Dr. Lee and Dr. Bennett, and dedicated resources to a vanity project under the guise of pushing the Institute's limits. All of this was taking place before Phase 3 had been achieved, so resources, particularly energy, were being watched closely and strictly rationed, as evidenced by dialogue where Gen 1 synths are told to operate at lowered energy levels to conserve the facility's power. Both creating Synth Sean and releasing the sole survivor were all part of an elaborate attempt to create the family that never was. The family that was ripped apart by the Institute itself. Sean admits to as much should the Soul Survivor choose to leave the Institute and be branded an enemy by stating,
I had hoped we could be something like family again.
Introducing Milo's Rewards.
Shit, no.
Way to unlock savings from the pomegranate.
Christ. No.
I hope you share our vision for the future.
that is the point, because of the growing regret his father has
And you get this, buddy.
exacerbated by his cancer. In addition, since Sean causes several researchers to really question whether what they are doing is right, and whether synths are really people. Dr. Lee speaks of moments where she and other researchers will forget for moments at a time that since Sean is not a real boy, he is such a distraction in that regard.
I do that every time I hit a critical, and I don't know why I do. Dude, the reason I like playing with Ada is because she'll be like, make sure you don't leave anything useful behind. And everybody's like, dude, you seriously hoarding that junk? Yes. Always go to these meat bags. They're pretty nice. Oh, 50 cal. That guy will probably one-shot me. Yes, got him. I thought that took a little bit less than I thought it was actually gonna take. GG's. Hey, when can I get Rifleman? I'm close though. I'm getting close. Could also slap perk right here. But Okay, don't. Armor. I need 39. I need a little bit more weight. Then I can also go for Scrapper. Yeah. But later on, I want to get these perks. Critical Banker. That's a pretty good critical skill to have. Oh, I'm dumb. Give me a second. There he is. Oh, hell yeah. I'll take that. I will take that, indeed. Combat armor. Sorry, friend. Goodbye. Ooh, Super Sledge. Take that. I'll give that to my homie. I'm just dropping this. It's too heavy. I'll find another one. Yeah, not really. Hold on, guys. Give me a second. There's gotta be a mattress somewhere over here. Because these super mutants have to sleep, right? That's a mini nuke. Holy shit. Oh, nice. I don't use Fat Man. I know I'm gonna find the bed. People will be like, oh, why are you trying to find the bed? Survival mode. But I gotta. Ooh, silver. Hey man, look at that. 90 energy and ballistic. That will help cushion some of the blows I keep getting dealt. Can't find any beds, but I'll just have to be careful. I'll have to employ due care. Oh. No, no, that's a legendary. Just die. Just die. No. No, I'm about to die. Rush in the cover, rush in the cover, rush in the cover, rush in the cover. Holy shit. 250 rads, that is... Luckily, my Overseer's Guardian is putting these guys down. I'm dropping these bitches like a bad habit. And they drop pretty nice scrap. I will not be fooled by that. Oh, hey, 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 hey. Ooh, drug. Money. Ada? Let's say, Ada, if you freaking kill me like that, I'm gonna be pissed. Oh, there's a Tesla in here. There we go. Should have enough health. Let's go kill that dummy. clips. Camping little shitter. What is it doing? What is it? I probably should pop a little red X right here.
Hey, grab anything useful.
That's my girl. Grab anything. Just loot everything.
Hey,
I'd be
wait
happy
there.
to help if I can.
Come on.
I'll get it done.
Hey, Ada.
Did you retrieve something from that robot?
It had this strange device.
Let's have a look. Impressive technology. If my analysis is, I suspect it's help as the next.
Sounds like a solid plan.
I'm glad you'll need to maintain.
Welcome to the General Atomics Quality Assurance Department, where we assure your functionality is up to our high standards. We must run a few tests before returning you to your caregiving duties. Now, proceeding to the first, we must test your disciplinary and behavioral management skills. The Quality Assurance Associate will be playing the role of your hyper-suitable charge, Little Timmy. Little Timmy has broken a valuable vase while playing catch in the house. The vase was a family heirloom, and it is quite irreplaceable. Please punish the child accordingly.
Okay. Oh, sorry there. Got a little ahead of myself.
Corporal punishment is strictly forbidden unless the user enables it in your configuration mode. Proceeding to the second test. A proper missionary unit must be able to identify the needs of our charges. Please assess the state of the crying child and fulfill its needs.
Oh.
Correct. The child was hungry. The focal tonality analysis programming seems to be in working order. Please take this opportunity to reconfirm that any deprecated muffling procedures are not left in your program. Now please, proceed into the third testing chamber. We will now test your hazard detection matrices. Please childproof this environment by moving any hazardous object to where little ants cannot reach. Childproof the room.
And there's a machete somewhere. Where's the machete? Isn't there a machete somewhere in this room?
Please eliminate any potential tool of self-harm. It's too late, Division. All potentially fatal objects have been put out of a child's reach. Please remember, children have a penchant for finding ways to harm themselves. They never are truly safe. Absolute diligence is required. Congratulations! It appears you are fully functional and ready to return to service. Please take a replacement fusion core from the safe in the hallway on your way out.
Hey,
Yes.
Yeah.
Hope you find what you're looking for.
And you should get like 3. Yup, you got 3.
Advanced Systems Division so as not to disturb other scientists. Likewise, another researcher on the project, Janet Thompson, has a crisis of conscience where she questions if it's right for them to have made a child synth, since he will forever be a child, unable to grow up or have a family of his own. Janet is told by her husband to not speak of such things or risk disciplinary action for considering Synth Sean to be a person. Synth Sean is causing more than just Father to doubt that synths are just machines. This personal project is doing more to undermine the claim and belief among the Institute that synths are machines, damaging the core justification for continued synth creation and use. And all of this comes at a hefty cost. By releasing the Soul Survivor and creating Synth Sean, he goes against his prime directive, which is to act in the best interest of the Institute. By wasting resources, wasting the time of Institute scientists, sacrificing capable assets, revealing one of the great secrets of how to find the Institute, and allowing opposing factions to obtain that sensitive information and technology. However, this is really only the tip of the iceberg and shows how, on the one hand, Father is willing to commit atrocious acts for the good of the Institute, and yet will undermine all of that progress because of his driving desire to have the family that he always wanted. Father wastes no time in trying to convince the Soul Survivor to join the Institute, and as long as the player doesn't immediately reject Father's offers or kill him at the first meeting, the Soul Survivor will be given free reign to explore almost every corner of the Institute, and even be given the ability to use the molecular relay at will. As Father says, the Institute is as much of a home to the Soul Survivor now as it is to himself. That is a dangerous amount of freedom given to someone that has not demonstrated any allegiance to the Institute. To make matters worse, Father and others in the Institute are well aware that the Soul Survivor associated with and used factions like the Railroad or the Brotherhood of Steel to make their way to the Institute. This entire time, the Soul Survivor has nearly unlimited access to the Institute, its terminals, facilities, and personnel. After completing several missions and becoming more familiar with the Institute, Father will eventually confront the Soul Survivor about his relations with the Railroad.
You know, Father, it's no secret that you worked with the Railroad in order to first reach the Institute. The depth of your involvement with them has been called into question repeatedly. I'm sure you can guess by whom. The question is, where do you stand with them now? Do you count them amongst your allies?
Wouldn't this have been a pertinent question before giving the sole survivor full access to the Institute and able to teleport in and out at will, Father's complete unwillingness to do due diligence in this regard is the exact reason that the sole survivor can assist the Railroad or the Brotherhood of Steel in destroying the Institute. This appears to be a completely unhealthy and, frankly, unwarranted level of trust that Father has for the sole survivor. Something that becomes apparent should the player choose to betray the Institute and side with one of the other factions, where Father says,
You had me fooled. I really believed you were on our side.
Father is a danger to the Institute since he has an emotional attachment to the sole survivor that he struggles to understand, and that ends up blinding him to the potential threats posed by the player. And those threats do not stop at just letting the sole survivor into the Institute. Father falls into full-blown nepotism by unilaterally appointing the sole survivor as the new director of the Institute. In the lead up to this frankly baffling announcement, Father will send the sole survivor on a series of missions, which culminates in an important operation at the Bunker Hill settlement. This operation involves recovering a number of synths that are being protected by the Railroad, and the player has the choice to follow the mission parameters or tip off the other factions. Failing the mission for the Institute offers illuminating dialogue from Father when he berates the sole survivor for having botched the operation and telling them,
Heads up.
This was such a simple task. I just don't understand. I know you're capable of handling yourself. How can I expect you to represent the Institute if this sort of thing
What
continues?
you've got.
Bunker Hill was to cement your place as a valuable asset to the Institute. It will now only raise suspicions. I will refrain from sharing the outcome with the Directorate for the moment. Things are already in motion, but this would only derail. A single courser could have done that job by himself. You must see how disappointing this is.
Bro, no
The chances
shame.
of failing this mission were so astronomically low that yes, it does matter.
Father is upset because it will make his soon-to-be announcement of the appointment of the sole survivor to director look pathetic, since failing the mission would raise suspicions and call the sole survivor, and by extension, Father's competence, into question. It is interesting to note that Father was trying to use this mission as an easy win, since the odds had been calculated to be so heavily weighted in favor for the Institute that failure was not even seen as remotely possible, and that a single courser could have completed the mission himself. And somehow, this was meant to be a feather in the sole survivor's cap. A mission extremely likely to succeed that could be completed by a courser was meant to illustrate the sole survivor's abilities and loyalty to the Institute. It is obvious that this was an ill-conceived attempt to somewhat bolster and validate Father's surprise announcement that he would be calling the sole survivor to replace him as director. Even the other department leads are gobsmacked by his decision, decrying it because the sole survivor is not a member of the Institute, nor is he a scientist. And these are definitely valid concerns. The sole survivor has knowingly cooperated with groups hostile to the Institute, was given a few easy missions to prove his capabilities and loyalty, which, by the way, can be failed with seemingly no consequence, after which he is proclaimed to become the next director by his own son, someone that has proven to make poor decisions due to his desire to have a relationship and some sort of family with the sole survivor. As if the nepotism wasn't already clear, some of the division leads will stage a small mutiny in which the sole survivor is tasked with defusing the situation. Rather shockingly, as Father describes the situation, he asks the sole survivor to deal with the mutineers by saying,
Don't assume this is a bluff. These men are
Alive.
proud.
See if he had anything worth
They
taking.
might well be prepared to die for their cause. Hopefully violence won't be necessary. But in the end, you must do what's
Yes, if I can gather all these,
"You are telling
this
me
piece, this
that
armor,
Father unilaterally appointed
all this
his
stuff,
dad,
dude, I can make so much bunk.
someone who has
Bunk.
no connection
Buck.
to outside groups,
I can
and has
bank on
only
this,
just left the
dude.
Institute and barely done anything to prove their
This is a
allegiance.
new era.
That the sole survivor gets the green light to kill the department heads that are upset with his decisions, and that's totally fine. Is this really what's best for the Institute, as Father directly said, or is this what is best for Father's wishes and familial desires? The blatant favoritism for the Soul Survivor is the capstone of the monument that is Father's incompetent leadership.
Conclusion.
Now, after all of this, I want to be fair to Father. Not every single awful action or bad thing about the Institute was his fault. The initial FEV experiments that were kidnapping surface dwellers, turning them into super mutants, and then releasing them topside to cause chaos did not start with Father, but he didn't end it either. He also wasn't in charge during the Broken Mask incident, which was the result of doing Gen 3 field testing too early. Lastly, the massacre of the CPG was also before Father's time. So the Institute was already seen as a malevolent group who were building human-like machines, all the while people were disappearing for no discernible reason. The Institute's image as the boogeyman of the Commonwealth was established.
I have no idea why I sided with the Institute. Probably because I wanted to see my son in the game. It's like, bruh, I shouldn't have sided with those idiots. I'll side with the Minutemen in my next playthrough, because at least they want to help people.
Still engaging in replacements and abductions, and going so far as wiping out entire settlements for some pre-war research information. A good Institute director, maybe not objectively good, but good for the faction, would accept the reality of the past and justify the current questionable actions by claiming that it is necessary for the good of the Institute. They would justify it by selling the true goal of the Institute, to change the world with their technology. But that could only happen with them in control. They could talk of a future where humans were freed from the shackles of menial labor, and the synths would allow mankind to engage in their true passions, to devote all time to advanced science, art, and technology. The leader would sell that idea, this philosophy, to the player, and use the means justify the ends logic to explain why they have to do awful things like wipe out settlements or abduct people. Then it would be on the player to decide if, first, they agree with this ideology, and second, whether they think the ends really do justify the means. And a good leader would not let his personal problems stand in the way of the Institute achieving these goals. All of these points we discussed is not what makes the Institute bad, however. Or, let me rephrase that. The Institute engages in many things that can be considered bad and morally wrong, but they are more than that. The Institute's goals are vague and never plainly described. Their methods are reprehensible and contradictory. The organization is on the one hand an incredible example of scientific progress, and on the other, completely aimless. All of these things are simultaneously true, which causes confusion amongst fans when talking about the motives and actions of the Institute. While the Institute staked its claim as an organization hostile towards those that live in the Commonwealth in the 2230s, it is Father that is to blame for what makes the Institute so frustrating to unravel and assign motives. Father is willing to engage in the morally bankrupt practices of murder, kidnapping, and enslavement of a sentient group of synths, while simultaneously whitewashing the past, downplaying the present, and justifying enslavement. While Father seems all in on getting his hands dirty for the betterment of the Institute, he is undermining all of that because of his strong desire to have some sort of family with his remaining parent. He wastes time and resources to create a synth child with no regard for the consequences of his actions to fulfill some sort of fantasy. He places so much trust in the Soul Survivor that the Institute is handed to any faction of their choosing on a silver platter, and submits to pure nepotism by appointing the Soul Survivor to become the new director, even though it causes a literal mutiny that can result in bloodshed. Whatever terrible acts that Father justifies as being in the best interest of the Institute are completely unjustifiable by anyone as soon as he invalidates that progress with personal ambitions. The Institute is confusing because Father is confused. The Institute lacks clear direction and meaning because Father struggles to choose one direction. The Institute, well, sucks because as a character, Father kind of sucks too. So next time you become frustrated by the Institute's writing, Just remember that most of that rests on the shoulders of your son, the director of the Institute, and the father of synths. But hey, if it makes you feel better, just tell everyone that he takes after his mother. Thank you, brothers and sisters, for making it this far, and an enormous thank you to my patrons.
Full Ghoul
There's a
Lore Part
growing
1.
interest in socialism among young people in America, but do they know about its dismal past in history of...
Yeah, boy. Yeah, sure. Socialism is common in my generation. Like, what?
Radiant service.
Like, yeah, proof?
Welcome all followers of the Undying Glow to this week's sermon by your favorite irradiated dude, where we
Hey,
are looking
Myrna.
at special souls in Adam's sight,
Sure.
the ghouls.
Take a look.
Ghouls have featured in every single Fallout game to date. They seem to be as much a part of Fallout's DNA as anything else, because from their very first appearance in the first Fallout, their lore has been expanded to a truly impressive level. This is the first half of a full
Oh, look at that
treatment of
money.
ghouls within the Fallout series, with a specific emphasis on looking at how each game portrays, changes, expands, or retcons previous ghoul lore. Going chronologically, this will examine what I call the interplay period. That is everything up to Fallout 3, and the Bethesda era will be done in the second video. It is one thing to know the lore of any given thing within the Fallout series, and another thing to know how the lore has evolved, and what the creators were trying to tell us and show us about ghouls as a group, as individuals, and how they survive in their corner of the wasteland. So, crank up the rads and slough off some skin as we explore the complete lore of...
I'm gonna build a sentry bot or some sort of robot that's based on, like,
The
storage.
game that started it all. What a great game. Much of what came to define the Fallout series start here, and well, that makes sense. It is the first game after all. Most players, long before they ever see or speak to what we have come to know and love as ghouls, they will most likely hear some juicy tidbits from other NPCs. The settlement of Junktown has two people that will warn the player of both ghouls and the place that they call home. Tycho, one of the great companions of the first Fallout, tells the player that ghouls live in a place called Necropolis, and explains that these ghouls seem human, but are far different. Necropolis, which in Greek means City of the Dead, was further explained by Tycho when he said, "The City of Death is well named. It is now home to ghouls and worse." Killian Darkwater is the mayor of Junktown and confirms that it is a City of Death because he has lost 2 patrols that he sent in that direction. None of this bodes well, and definitely builds up Necropolis and its ghoul inhabitants as being an especially dangerous and mysterious place. Necropolis cannot be avoided, even if you really did want to heed Tycho's and Killian's warnings, because a critical quest item can only be found there. The water chip, which is needed to fix the Vault 13 water filtration system, can only be found at Necropolis. And so, willingly or not, everyone has to set foot inside the City of the Dead to finish the main quest. A few things are immediately apparent when the Vault Dweller first enters Necropolis. The background picture of the local map is looking pretty rough, but hey, it's the apocalypse. What do you expect? And there are hordes of slouched green humanoid creatures in tattered clothing, shambling about aimlessly. They don't seem to say anything either.
Interesting how far
growling,
Fallout
and
has
making
become
all
as a
manner of
game.
Other guttural or animalistic sounds. Inspecting some of these ghouls reveals that they seem to have been human once, or at least descended from humans. The Vault Dweller guesses that the deterioration of the body could be the result of acid or radiation. Getting close to try and speak with the shambling ghouls causes them to become hostile when you get close, although they are not much of a threat. They walk slowly and don't cover too much distance, and only attack with their fists, doing very little damage. These ghouls seem to only be a concern when fighting a bunch at once, and they have such low perception that they are quite easy to run past without engaging in combat. If this description starts to make you think of zombies, well, that seems to be intended. A random encounter around Necropolis has the Vault Dweller encounter a few ghouls, and they are described as skinny, hostile humanoids who shuffle up to the player to attack with their hands. But observing them in-game will lead to the game describing them as zombie guards. Another random encounter will show the result of a battle or raid on a merchant caravan with multiple dead bodies, some dead merchants, and a dead ghoul caravan guard. Once again, the game labels the dead ghoul guard as a zombie guard. The one up close and personal view of a ghoul that we get is a ghoul leader named Set, who gets a talking head. We see that ghouls are missing skin, showing bones and ligaments underneath, missing features like noses or ears, and even have empty space in their chest cavities. There appears to be some sort of strange scarification, like what can be seen over his right eye, and his left eye is dark red. Much of the skin is also colorless or grainy, looking like it is either dead or gangrenous, appearing deeply necrotic. There are two other in-game observations regarding ghouls that reinforce these zombie similarities. One is as follows: the body of the humanoid looks to be highly irradiated, but still functioning. While it was once human, it seems to have reverted to a more animalistic lifestyle. And another, much of the muscle and brain matter seems to have deteriorated. However, genetic indicators lead you to believe that it descended, like you, from those that entered the vaults. Set, the leader I just mentioned, will also not talk to the player unless it's evening or nighttime, seeming to have a strong preference towards operating at night, not too unlike popular portrayals of zombies. It seems clear that many physical and some behavioral aspects of ghouls were inspired by zombies, even if that term itself is used sparingly. But even with At first, it seems like Necropolis is just several groups of hostile, slow, unintelligible creatures that look like they have just been doused in acid or radiation. Exploration reveals that the only way to get to other parts of the city is through the underground tunnels, where another group of ghouls are found, but these ones are different. Upon first encounter, a ghoul leader asks the Vault Dweller not to shoot them and engages in dialogue. Although these ghouls have the same appearance as those above, they not only speak and emote, but they reveal that there are some complex politics at play with the ghouls that live within the city. They are split into two main factions, one on the surface of Necropolis that is led by a violent and vindictive leader.
There you go, buddy.
And this group down in the sewers and tunnels that are far more peaceful and disagree with Set and how he governs. A current crisis revolves around water. The settlement's water pump has broken, and they are only able to get clean, purified water, or what they call the flow, an almost religious reference from what they call the deep. Deep below the surface of the city is Vault 12, and it is the source of the ghouls' life-giving water, and where the only water chip in this part of the wasteland can be found. Things are even more complicated though, since these surface ghouls under Set have been forced into an uneasy truce with occupying super mutants because their leader, the Master, ordered the super mutants to establish a base. The base of Set's ghouls on the surface is called both the Temple by some surface ghouls or the Hall of the Dead by Set and some of those close to him. It is unknown whether all these names like Hall of the Dead and Necropolis come from human outsiders giving these names due to fear and discrimination, or if the ghouls themselves came up with these names. It is also possible that outsiders gave ghouls and the settlement of Necropolis their names, and the ghouls just embraced them as a way to remove the negative meanings behind them. Dialogue with a peculiar character named Harold, who we will get to more a little later, makes it clear that the ghouls seem insistent on using the term ghoul. When asked about them, Harold corrects the Vault Dweller, who used the word ghoul by saying,
Mutants. Doesn't matter what they call themselves.
That sentence alone makes it seem like ghouls named themselves, rather than outsiders. The ghouls have names that they use for humans in return though. Set will refer to the Vault Dweller as Normie, Bloodbag, and Walker. The second one seems to imply that ghouls don't have blood in the same way humans do, and the last one, Walker, seems to imply that ghouls can't walk like humans can. Set will also say himself that ghouls are the future, as they can survive anywhere, and therefore are much better adapted than humans for the new, irradiated world. Super mutants seem to agree that they think ghouls are tougher or somehow more capable than humans as well. The ghoul superiority complex, all these nicknames, and the way that ghouls treat the Vault Dweller reflect the tense relationship between ghouls and humans, although they do have some limited interaction. We know of some merchants that will travel to Necropolis to trade, and there's even another former Vault 13 dweller who had ventured to Necropolis before the player character. Not all ghouls will talk to the Vault Dweller, and many of those that do will only speak to them for a short time or tell them to leave them and Necropolis alone. Most those on the surface that will engage in dialogue all speak quite strangely, either using symbolic language and metaphors, like with Set, or speaking a language akin to Creole, like in the case of the hotel manager. These dialects may have developed as a result of their insular community, similar to how some real-world groups went on to develop their own languages, like Yiddish. It should be pointed out, however, that there are entire groups of ghouls who do not demonstrate any ability to communicate. The groups of ghouls that roam the surface will only grunt. There are a couple of what are called glowing ones at the entrance of the underground Vault 12 who are deemed mad by the rest of the ghouls because they violently lash out at everyone. And the in-game descriptions mention some ghouls seem to have reverted to a more animalistic lifestyle. This seems to describe a wild or feral kind of state, one where necrotic degeneration has reached its most extreme, but it is never referred to as such in the game. It is worth noting, however, that the groups that appear to be feral on the surface of Necropolis can apparently still follow orders. When the Vault Dweller agrees to help Set get rid of the super mutants that are occupying the water pump house, he says that he will not send word to all his ghouls to leave the player alone, just in case word would make it to the super mutants and tip them off to the plan. This would imply that the shamblers around Necropolis can receive and listen to orders, so would that make them truly feral? There are two NPCs in the Southern California wasteland that make the story of ghouls even more peculiar. Harold is an old soul, having weathered the Great War in a vault, and later becoming a merchant and explorer in the post-war years. He and Richard Gray explored a mysterious pre-war facility called the Mariposa Military Base, where Richard fell into a vat of Forced Evolutionary Virus, or FEV, and would go on to become the main antagonist of Fallout called the Master. Harold would be knocked out by the same robotic arm, only coming 2 days later outside the base when he was already starting to change and mutate. His in-game sprite is the same as a ghoul, and a close-up look when engaging in dialogue makes him look just like a ghoul as well. Similar to Set, his skin is green. He's missing body parts like his nose or ears. You can see straight to his bone or even through his ribcage, and perhaps coincidentally, his right eye is gone and grown over with scar tissue, just like Set. He is, by all appearances, a ghoul that has been alive for much longer than the normal human lifespan. When he is asked why he mutated and if it could have been due to radiation, he says he doesn't know. It says it must have been something from the military base, which we know has one of the greatest concentrations of FEV anywhere on the West Coast. Another man named Talius came from Vault 13 to solve the Vault's water issues before the main character set out on the adventure that kickstarts the story. And Talius went to Necropolis after hearing about their ability to pump purified water. The super mutants were relative newcomers to Necropolis themselves at the time, and the ghouls and super mutants were actively fighting each other. Talius helped the ghouls in their fight against the super mutants, but ended up being captured by the super muties and was exposed to FEV, which began a mutation process. He didn't turn into a super mutant like they were hoping. Rather, he mutated in a unique way that looks just like a ghoul. Unfortunately, we don't get to see a close-up of Talius like we do with Harold, but an in-game observation when the Vault Dweller first meets him says, "You see a hideous ghoul." But Talius will never refer to himself as a ghoul, rather some sort of mutant. So,
get yourself some attire, buddy.
Cases. One of Talius, who was exposed to FEV and mutated into either a ghoul or something that looks just like it, and the other case, Harold, has him also mutating from an unknown source into something that looks exactly like a ghoul with greatly prolonged life. It is most likely that Harold owes his mutations to FEV. The military base was just drowning in it, but we just don't know. This leads us to consider whether FEV plays a role in the process of becoming a ghoul, or if it is just a coincidental form of mutation. So we have what I will call the normal ghouls that are most commonly seen, a potential FEV ghoul in Harold and Talius, as well as glowing ones who are glowing due to an extreme amount of radiation. Like with almost all Fallout locations, Necropolis gets a number of possible endings depending on the player's actions, but we know which of these endings are canon. Due to the actions of the Vault Dweller, killing the super mutants in Necropolis in order to get access to the pump house, a new group of super mutants were sent to Necropolis to raze the settlement to the ground. And in doing so, they killed many ghouls and scattered almost everyone else to the wasteland. So things look very bad for the one single settlement and concentration of ghouls in this part of the wasteland. Even with all this information about one of Fallout's most in proximity, use, and partial occupation of Vault 12 in the absence of anyone else, means that they could come from the vault, but information is quite biased because the ghouls are so isolated and untrusting of outsiders. All the ghouls seem concentrated in Necropolis. So is it really the only place for hundreds of miles where ghouls can be found? Does that mean ghouls only came from Necropolis? Or did ghouls from elsewhere migrate to Necropolis to escape persecution? If all or most of the ghouls came from Necropolis itself, what was so special about that area to produce ghouls? Are Harold and Talius ghouls? And if so, does that mean FEV is needed to create a ghoul, along with radiation? Did ghouls give themselves that name and embrace the whole death motif, or was that foisted on them by others? As just a quick aside, some Fallout concept art shows what seems to be an early version of a ghoul, but it's called a Bloodman. I like this design, and just wanted to mention it. Fallout 2 is the next game and source of information for ghouls in the Fallout series, taking place almost 100 years after the events of Fallout and covering some of the same geographic areas as well. Once again, we see ghouls, and luckily Fallout 2 does a good job in expanding their lore. Similar to how ghouls were only seen in one settlement in the previous game, ghouls are primarily found in two settlements in Fallout 2, the town of Gecko and the mining town of Broken Hills. Whereas the ghouls in Necropolis were borderline or just outright hostile to the player, the ghouls in Fallout 2 are more often than not willing to talk to the Chosen One and are friendly. There are also a lot more named ghoul characters, where Fallout only had 2. Fallout 2 now has 17. Fallout 2 also shows a lot more diversity of thought amongst the ghouls, who they are, why they are the way they are, and what, if anything, can be done about it. Gecko is a unique town because it has sprung up around a pre-war nuclear reactor that survived the Great War and successfully shut itself down to avert disaster. The game, manuals, and guides are not specific about when ghouls started to gather in and around the nuclear plant, but enough ghouls settled in this place that they were able to get the nuclear reactor back online. This presented the opportunity to generate power, but also caused drama with the nearby settlement of Vault City, since the nuclear reactor was not running very efficiently and was irradiating groundwater that Vault City relied on for survival. The situation is not helped at all by Vault City's incredible bigotry towards all mutants, of which ghouls are a kind of mutant, and Gecko gets all of Vault City's justified and unjustified ire. A new but quite understandable development among ghouls is a strange new cult, whose immediate goal at least is to find a way to reverse ghoulification and have ghouls be reborn as humans. This group is based in Gecko, is called a renewal cult, and has suckered in a number of ghouls, the ones that most resent or tire of being a ghoul, wishing instead to once again be a normie, as Seb would say, and not subjected to the incredible discrimination that ghouls face at the hands of nearly everyone else. What makes this cult strange, though, is that it is not led by a ghoul, or a scientist, or anyone like that. It is led by a hyper-intelligent mole rat, who is mutated with FEV, and is using the ghouls to his own ends. He thinks using the power generated at Gecko and the technology that Vault City possesses would give him a good foundation for his plans for world domination. He gets the ghouls to do his bidding by promising them to use Vault City's technology and medical facilities to develop a cure that would allow them to be renewed into humans once again. And he abuses this distant hope that the ghouls have for his own ends.
That's just terrible.
Is not the only interesting belief among the ghouls in Gecko. A smooth-talking ghoul with a rare full head of hair named Gordon, who was part of the renewal cult, thinks that without medical intervention, all ghouls will die within the next 20 years. There is no evidence to support this claim, and I can't think of a reason why many of these ghouls who have lived almost 200 years after the Great War would all start dying en masse within the next 20. Lastly, a special ghoul named Lenny, who was a doctor before the Great War that turned him into a ghoul. Although he was an old man when he ghoulified, the condition has brought him much longer life, and he has continued to practice as a doctor to the poor souls of Gecko. He believes that if he had access to the medical technology of Vault City, that he would be able to remove all the radiation from within ghouls, and he believes this would allow ghouls to heal. What exactly this means, we can't know for sure, but maybe he believes that ghouls could change back into humans as well. It is interesting to note that the number of ghouls that express a desire to find a cure or revert back to their human form is rather high. Has the time between Fallout and Fallout 2 increased this sentiment? Are ghouls just more open to outsiders now and willing to admit such things? Ghouls also no longer readily state that they think they are inherently superior to humans, so this seems to be a pretty large ideological shift among ghouls. Lenny the doctor we spoke of before provides some insight that may explain some of this. He was there in Necropolis when the Vault Dweller came and killed the super mutants and fixed up their pump. He speaks of how good it felt for a human to care enough about Necropolis and its ghouls to save their lives, and it made them feel like people again. Perhaps the Vault Dweller's selfless act made such an impression that it led many to reconsider their prior beliefs. It is even more impressive that Lenny has such a high opinion of the Vault Dweller because, while, yeah, he did save Necropolis, it was also their actions that led to super mutants attacking Necropolis and killing many of them. The friction between ghouls and humans were palpable in the first Fallout. Most of the ghouls don't care to speak to you, and entire groups are instantly hostile. As a player, we never really witnessed any of the discrimination between ghouls and humans, although we were the recipient of it when exploring Necropolis. Fallout 2 actually does show us the bigotry and unfair treatment in no uncertain terms. I mentioned it a bit before, but Vault City, who is filled with an inordinate amount of pricks, has an issue against mutants and anyone who is not a citizen of the city. Ghouls are strictly not allowed inside the city. They have a shoot-on-sight order for them, and they will not even trade with ghouls. So ghoul-dominated communities need to have human middlemen to help with trade interactions, and many in Vault City, primarily the first citizen Joanne Lynette, are seeking a solution to what can be called their ghoul problem. They already had paid someone to try and take care of the ghoul problem, but they can and will ask the Chosen One to go to Gecko, stop the reactor, which solves the water pollution problem, but that's not enough for them. They don't want ghouls living so close to them, and that requires taking the ghouls out, even though Vault City would actually benefit greatly from the power provided by the improved nuclear reactor. There was a man that used to live in Vault City named Lumpy, who was found to have a mutation that made him resistant to radiation. Even that was too much for Vault City, and they banished him, leaving him with few options, and he ended up in Gecko, surrounded by ghouls with a similar immunity to radiation. Broken Hills is the only other community that is populated by a significant number of ghouls, although it has a number of super mutants and even some humans to make up the most diverse of all locations in Fallout 2. Broken Hills is a mining town, mining and refining uranium to be sold to the likes of Gecko, who can then use it in their nuclear power plant. The fact that all these kinds of people can coexist and make a functional community should be an exemplary achievement, an example to the rest of the wasteland of what is possible if everyone lays prejudice aside. Unfortunately, Broken Hills has a big problem simmering beneath the surface. There is an anti-mutant conspiracy involving a number of humans who wish to rid the community of the super mutant mayor and all other mutants, and thereby control the town and the profitable uranium deposits. They had previously attempted to assassinate Marcus, the town's leader, but they were thwarted by the beefy mutant, and they will try again and ask the Chosen One for help. They really hate mutants. While the player can help them successfully carry out their plot, or report them to Marcus and have them wiped out, if the player does neither of these things and just ignores the situation, the conspirators will eventually successfully wipe out all mutants. This dooms the settlement because, wouldn't you know it, having miners and workers that are immune to radiation and have incredibly long lifespans make for great uranium mine and refinery workers. Lenny, the Dr. Ghoul and Gecko can join the player as a companion, but doing so will showcase some of the bigotry throughout the wasteland. They are, of course, not welcome in Vault City, but even other places like the mining town of Redding will show active discrimination, where people will say awful things and you will be refused service. Although the first game went pretty far to make ghouls similar in many ways to zombies, Fallout 2 lessens it a little bit. The label zombie, however, seems to be a fairly common insult for ghouls, since if the player calls the Gecko bartender Woos a zombie, he will reply, "Zombies? Fuck you. We're ghouls. Zombies are a type of undead with no free will. Although we share certain physical characteristics, most notably the rotting flesh and characteristic morbidity, we are creatures of free will." We get a good amount of information related to ghouls in general because the son of Set, a ghoul named Typhon, lives in Broken Hills. Typhon was a young child when he ghoulified, but he grew up and developed into an adult, just, as a ghoul, and so he doesn't know any other life. Unlike most other ghouls who distinctly remember and miss their previous unmutated lives. Remember this bit for later. Typhon refers to him and all the ghouls around him as the first and last generation of ghouls, giving the impression that ghouls were all created in one single event, the Great War. This statement doesn't seem to be substantiated by anything else, except for the fact that of all the ghouls that will talk about their past, all of them lived in the pre-war and were ghoulified around the time of the Great War. Typhon will tell the Chosen One that he amassed a treasure of bottle caps from his days of running and winning races. This fairly mundane detail is memorable only because it is contradictory to everything we know about how ghouls can get around. They are only seen shuffling around. They derisively called humans walkers, and Lenny from Broken Hills literally says that when he saw the Vault Dweller years ago in Necropolis, he knew he wasn't a ghoul because he was running, and according to Lenny, us ghouls can't run much anymore. But as an additional twist, Lenny totally can run when recruited as a companion, so either Typhon is just telling stories, it's an inconsistency, or ghouls can actually run. One last interesting comment from Typhon is related to the prevalent mental issues that seem to plague ghouls. He believes that radiation has had deleterious effects on ghouls' brains, but he seems to imply that this is more psychological than physiological. In his mind, he is much better adjusted and suffers fewer issues than other ghouls since he has never known any other life. Fallout 2 also introduced a new ghoul model in addition to the green skin and glowing ghoul sprites. These new ones appear to be in a shredded vault suit and are white and pink, giving the impression that they are pale with exposed muscle. The in-game description actually says that these ghouls have skin that is badly burned, so ghouls can also be burned or charred decades after they ghoulified. Woos, the bartender, will also give a pretty graphic description of how ghouls are formed, which is actually the first in-depth description that we get, other than simply saying radiation, and they say that like it's a bad thing. Woos confirms that a ghoul is made with severe radiation, like after the bombs went off, along with the light and heat that burned the flesh off. Does the lack of skin on ghouls indicate that their skin was burned off by nuclear blasts? Or are only the ghouls that are said in-game to have burned skin the ones lucky enough to be burned by atomic fire, but survive due to their new ghoulerific condition? Back to ghouls' brains being affected by their condition. There is a kind of ghoul that will only be encountered outside of settlements, only referred to as a crazy. They are always hostile, no matter what, and found in encounters in the wasteland. These crazed ghouls are often shown as glowing ones and have very limited dialogue. Literally, the only 4 things they will say are, "Send more adventurers," "Moan," "Make the pain stop," and lastly, "Brains." Apparently, the developers weren't quite done comparing ghouls to zombies, particularly these crazed ones, although these crazed ghouls can still fight with weapons. How these ghouls ended up in this state is not known. Is it radiation? Time? The social isolation and discrimination? Ghouls are subject to severe hardships, which is best shown in 2 specific examples. So maybe it's not so surprising that some of them completely lose their minds. Woody is a ghoul that has a propensity to fall asleep randomly and for long periods of time, and his friend Percy, a Ghoul and Gecko, asks the Chosen One to try and find him to make sure he's okay. The Chosen One will eventually find him. He is being passed off as an Egyptian mummy by a con man named the Great Ananias, where he appears to be a dead and desiccated corpse. He has been in this state for days, or maybe even weeks, before he is woken up by the Chosen One and runs off. An even more extreme example, and what would quite literally be a nightmare, is the story of Coffin Willie, a particularly smelly ghoul. He had made his way to New Reno to drink and gamble and do standard New Reno things when he was abducted by people and taken to a graveyard called Golgotha. He was buried alive, and somehow, months after having been buried, he can be dug up by the Chosen One, and he's no worse for the wear. How was he able to survive being buried in a coffin for months without food, water, or even
It's a
air?
ghoul thing, my
It
guy.
is never explained, but ghouls seem capable of living through environments that no human possibly could. It is also worth pointing out that one new development in Fallout 2 from the first game is that the game goes to great lengths to let us know how bad ghouls stink. It makes sense that a mostly necrotic body would smell awful, but apparently the stench is awful enough that some ghouls will admit that they are even glad that their noses rotted away, otherwise they would choke on their own stench. The last interesting point that Fallout 2 makes in reference to ghouls has to do with our good old friend Harold. Harold's mutated condition in the first Fallout was ambiguous. Is he a ghoul, as the in-game observation alludes to, or something else? Once again, Fallout 2 will describe Harold when observing him in-game as a leathery and spry-looking ghoul. He will refer to the player as a smoothskin, which is Fallout's 2 new nickname that ghouls use for humans. However, Harold has something that no other ghoul does. He has started to sprout a plant out of his head. He seems pretty okay with it though, having given it a name and implying that Bob, as he calls the sapling, thinks or has feelings itself. Regardless, Harold looks much like how he did in the first Fallout, this time with a green eye. His skin is a deeper shade of green, and of course a tree is growing out of his head. However, Harold isn't the only one whose body is merging with nature in weird ways. A ghoul in Broken Hills named Eric is very sweaty, which is kind of impressive because sweat glands reside in the skin, and ghouls are all afflicted by necrosis and are losing their skin. Anyway, his sweat is somehow the perfect blend of nutrients and attractants to cause flies to swarm in and lick up that.
There you go. We're getting used to this place as a safe house.
Delicious. The player can help Eric with his problem by getting his dwelling more power for his air conditioning. But it is interesting to note the number of ways that ghouls and their bodies are interacting with other organisms. Harold apparently has the right kind of nutrients for a tree to grow out of his head, and Eric has the right kind of nutrients to attract and feed flies. And with that, Fallout 2 has given us unique lore, or expanded on things previously only alluded to. The player was the subject of extreme discrimination by the ghouls, because they themselves were recipients of it. But now, in Fallout 2, we see that on full display, and it is awful. Ghouls collectively no longer seem proud or consider themselves superior, since there is an entire cult and many individuals who seek to reverse ghoulification entirely. The connection to zombies is still present, and Harold's representation as a ghoul is still as strong as ever. Ghouls are able to withstand circumstances that would kill a human, like extreme radiation, weeks or months without oxygen, food, or water, but they do seem to be psychologically prone to outright hostile madness. Ghouls are also incredibly stinky. They can have conventional necrosis, they can glow, they can be dried out and withered like Woody is described to be, or they can still be burned so many years after the Great War. Fallout Tactics was the next game to release, and we get to see ghouls in a totally different geographical location. These ghouls are not connected to the first two Fallouts, so it is a good opportunity to see how much they have in common in the Midwest United States. Ghouls can be found mainly in three areas where they tend to group together. One large settlement named Quincy has a shanty town that is sometimes called the Ghoul Quarter, where all the ghouls are found, and there are tensions between the ghouls and humans. Again, a product of intense discrimination. The ghoul leader Elliot is surprised and happy to learn that the warrior treats ghouls with respect, because not many do. as is evidenced by all the anti-ghoul and anti-mutant graffiti sprayed everywhere. A bonus mission in the game has the player character, the warrior, go to the city of Springfield because anti-ghoul sentiment has reached riotous levels. The prior mayor of Springfield disappeared under suspicious circumstances, and a new one, Mayor Avalone, was put in place but started to publicly acknowledge sympathies towards the ghoul population. A group of people who opposed the new mayor's attempts to guarantee ghouls the same rights as humans formed a plot where they would overthrow the government of Springfield, but do so disguised as raiders in order to try and protect the group. The Brotherhood of Steel got word of this plot and decided to intervene, but by the time the warrior arrives at Springfield, the coup is in full swing. The plotters would be wiped out by the Brotherhood of Steel, and the mayor would be reinstated, where he would ratify what is called the Bill of Monster Rights. Some of the rights that would be preserved as part of this bill were no violence against ghouls except in self-defense, enforced payment to ghouls at a minimum of half of that of a human, and my personal favorite, which is the outlawing of certain popular sayings. These phrases all refer to pooping and include pinching the ghoul, making ghoul babies, and dropping the ghoul off at the pool. The funny thing is, as progressive as Mayor Avalone and some of Springfield's populace is, he is still only willing to say that mutants are almost people, and he seems to mostly prize the ghoul's ability to do dirty jobs that can cause unafflicted humans to get sick. The last interesting location is within Kansas City.
Cricket balls up in this joint a lot.
Part of the city that isolates them from everybody else. And the ghoul-only place is called Gravestone. Gravestone was founded not long after the Great War, and the ghouls that founded it were survivors that had been working in the Kansas City nuclear silos. Once again, the ghouls occupy a part of the city that isolates them from everybody else, and the ghoul-only place is called Gravestone. Gravestone was founded not long after the Great War, and the ghouls that founded it were survivors that had been working in the Kansas City nuclear silos. After the Great War, the occupants of the silos survived but were subjected to an intense amount of radiation, and many died due to radiation sickness. But those that survived turned into ghouls. At some point in the 150 years since the Great War, the ghouls developed a religion that was based on the worship of an atomic bomb that they found in the launch facilities. That sounds awfully familiar. The bomb, called Plutonius, is seen as a symbol of the supreme nuclear power, and their first bishop was a ghoul named T-. His son, who is called Defcon, currently leads the ghouls at Gravestone, who have come under siege by the super mutant army. The super mutants are assaulting the ghouls in an attempt to recover the nuclear bomb that they worship, wanting it for their own military purposes. The Brotherhood responds to the plight of the ghouls, sending the warrior and their team to Kansas City to defeat the super mutants and save the ghouls who are fighting to protect themselves and their sacred idol. What is interesting is that when the Brotherhood does beat back the super mutants, one of their demands is to be able to use Plutonius, the bomb, in their own military efforts in defeating the Calculator, as they have no other way of cracking open Vault Zero. The ghouls agree, and due to the actions of the Brotherhood of Steel and saving them at Grand
Damn it, I was about to run off the
places like Quincy, ghouls expressed interest in joining the ranks of the Brotherhood of Steel, which the Brotherhood eventually allows. This ain't your grandpa's Brotherhood. Even though the Midwestern Brotherhood of Steel seems to be more accepting of mutants within their ranks, there are still many within the Brotherhood that are very bigoted, as can be seen in some of the comments, and possibly the worst offender is Commander Barnaky, who gives the player their missions in the early game. In tactics, it is very common for ghouls to lose body parts just going through their daily routine. Multiple ghouls, and especially one named Patches, are constantly talking about and joking about losing fingers, toes, ears, etc. While Fallout and Fallout 2 would mention such things happening, it was never at this level, and it seems like ghouls in the Midwest are all just literally falling to pieces. Defcon, the leader of the ghoul religion, has a tree that is growing out of his head, just like Harold in Fallout 2. So there's at least one other ghoul with this exact condition. A ghoul prisoner that can be freed from Vault Zero is known as Elaine, and she is quite interesting because she is described as looking almost human-like. While her in-game portrait certainly isn't as grotesque as many other ghoul characters, she is still very obviously a ghoul and has all the characteristics of a ghoul, except maybe the rampant necrosis that causes them to shed skin and hair. A recruitable ghoul by the name of Harold is one ugly dude with a tree growing out of his head, but this character is not the original Harold from the earlier games. Rather, he's just an homage to the character. Tactics leans hard into the discrimination that ghouls face in the Midwest, which is very similar to what we saw in Fallout 2. The interesting new element introduced, though, is the establishment of a large, nuclear power worshipping religion. Which, yeah, who would do that? But it is refreshing to see ghouls develop free locations that they can be found, but ghouls can be found in random encounters where they are always hostile. It isn't clear why, but perhaps these can be compared to the crazed ghouls that we encounter in Fallout 2. From limited conversation with the ghouls that can speak to the player, all the ghouls seem to be from the Great War period, indicating, like with Fallout 2, that all or at least the overwhelming majority of ghouls were created around the time of the Great War. Interestingly, there are no glowing ones found in the game. Tactics also takes the necrosis thing very seriously, since it is a running gag across multiple characters. They are all losing body parts all over the place, and ghouls appear to be very fertile ground for agriculture. The concept art for ghouls look awesome. A lot of them seem drippy, almost like the ghouls are partially melting. Others, their skin or clothing look finely shredded and hanging off in tatters. Again, some of the concepts have right eyeballs missing, like Set and Harold, and some of the in-game pictures of some ghouls do so as well. The in-game sprites can vary a bit, and ghouls can be an array of colors from a peach-like skin tone to light or dark green. We have been going through the games and their lore chronologically, but between Fallout Tactics and Fallout 3, we have canceled games, Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, and the Fallout Bible to take a peek at. The Fallout Bible, despite the authoritative name, is not the arbiter of Fallout canon. It was an ongoing project by one of the Fallout developers, Chris Avallone, to combine facts from the games with his behind-the-scenes experience and access to other Fallout developers to try and flesh out the lore. Therefore, it is very important to understand that any claim in the Bible, if it is not substantiated by Fallout 1, 2, or Tactics, that it could very well not be canon. Said simply, tread carefully and always check sources. The ghoul lore that is added by the Bible comes in a few categories. One is establishing dates for when certain things, like when Necropolis was formed. The role of radiation and FEV in causing mutations is covered with different thoughts presented by two different developers. Harold, in his condition, is talked about, and lastly, lore related to an area called Dayglow is spoken of, which was first mentioned in a holotape from Fallout 2, but not in any great detail. Bible Issue 0 consists of the first 3 Bible versions put together and gives us some dates for important ghoul-related events. Vault 12, found underneath the Necropolis, had its vault door purposefully not close all the way, allowing radiation to leak into the vault and affect the vault dwellers. The Necropolis is founded 61 years later in 2138 by the Vault's ghoulified survivors. They were led by the original Vault Overseer until 2084, when Set wrested control of Necropolis from him, and he is never heard of again. In 2157, the Master learns of the location of Vault 12, and sends super mutants there to try and recover the Vault Dwellers, or Prime Normals as he calls them, not weird, in order to expose them to FEV and create more super mutants. But they are disappointed to find that all the residents of Vault 12 have turned into ghouls. In 2162, the Vault Dweller recovers the chip from Necropolis and fixes their water pump, but we aren't given a date for the sacking of the city. This information is interesting because the ghouls being from Vault 12 is not explicitly stated by them or anyone else in the first Fallout, really is just inferred. The fact that the vault was designed to not seal properly as part of an experiment, and this is what led to them becoming ghouls, is also not hinted at all in either Fallout or Fallout 2. Fallout 2 was when the idea that vaults had an ulterior motive with experiments came into being. Some Fallout 2 events get a date now, like Broken Hills being established in 2185 by a group of humans, ghouls, and super mutants, and in 2235, Gecko, which had a small community of ghouls already, gets a sudden influx of ghoul migrants, and they get the nuclear plant working shortly after. In 2238, Harold makes his way to Gecko and becomes the leader of the community. In another part of Fallout Bible Issue 0, Chris Avallone says that all those that were to become ghouls were infected with FEV when the West Tech facility that housed a substantial amount of FEV was hit in the Great War and sent the virus airborne. This, mixed with radiation exposure, is what caused the ghouls to become what they are. In Bible number 5,
Stupid ass robots are actually starting to be annoying. Screw and oil.
Sweet.
Screws.
Got it.
Oil. How much?
Hey,
Glad to be of service.
These robots are these Cybermechs are starting to form a threat against my couriers. Must kill them.
Hey,
Yes, sir. Looking to light yellow.
Just sitting in a dumpster, you know. Oh, really? Thank you for making me go down here. I don't want to go down here.
hey.
How may I be of service?
Let me go back up to the fence.
Stick. Oh, you got a better chance.
Fallout 5. If one thing I want from Fallout 5 is the ability to do what the Mechanist is doing and send robots out.
Let's get you examined.
Hey,
Yes.
Doc.
Don't dally. If you're here to be examined.
Yeah. See what's wrong with me, Doctor.
No.
Hurting all over, Doc.
And that's that. Anything else bother?
Ugh. Doctors.
I love when my character does it. Ugh. Doctors.
Hey,
What can I do for you?
Every piece in here is worth what I
let's see what you have.
just don't call it junk.
You know, a shotgun's great insurance again.
Sure. Let's take a look.
Don't forget to...
Looking at me like that.
Ugh, disturbing.
Hey,
I'd be happy to help.
see if you had anything worth taking.
I'll take care of it.
These guys are getting freaking murdered by these robots. They don't stand a chance.
Heads up. Grab anything useful.
Projectron legs have to be the worst.
Check it out.
No problem.
See if there's anything there.
No problem.
Damn, she can carry so much stuff. It's probably because she has like the storage addition onto her. How are you supposed to get this dumpster?
Heads up.
Yes,
Over here.
certainly.
Attention, people of the common. On the mechanism.
Find anything useful?
Heads up.
Let's take a look at what you've got.
Oh, that'll do it. Yep, there we go. Holy shit, these guys don't want to die. That is such a win right there. Yes, we have new buddy. Let's upgrade you, Ada. Give you some actual good legs. It's a sentry arm? Oh.
Heads up.
Yes,
Wait
sir.
there. Come on.
Are you ready to install the radar beacon?
It's time. Let's do this.
Good. Once I'm in the robot.
Look alive.
I'll get it done. A moment. The modification was successful. New hardware has been detected and software is updating. And installation complete. Analyzing Mechanist hardware. The radar beacon is receiving a strong encrypted signal, but I can't determine the source.
It's a good start, at least.
Absolutely. Fortunately, I'm detecting.
Finally, we have an advantage.
Perhaps. Encryption. If you can bring me.
Uh-huh. Are you sure this will work?
I've calculated.
All right, let's do it.
Good. I'm uploading the. Just be careful.
Look at this. This guy's living his life. He's got a job. He's got a home and some water and some food. Are you kidding me?
Nothing there now.
If they're out there, we'll find them.
Look alive.
How may I be of service?
See if she had anything.
No problem.
Look alive.
What can I do for you?
Take anything good.
I'll get it done.
Yeah, take all their shit. We selling it to the market, dog. We need only their panties, dude, and their undies. Bruh. Imagine putting a guy in power armor and only having him use a pipe pistol. That's pathetic.
I'd be happy to help if I can.
Get that.
I'll take care of it.
Move here.
Certainly.
Pick that up.
I'll get it done.
Take that.
No problem.
Hey,
Yes. Picking up something. Don't worry, sir. We'll find them. Found them, sir.
on her.
That takes care of that. My databanks are
Hey.
continuing to accumulate vast amounts of data regarding them.
Now that's something random shit that she just says mid-battle. My database from the beginning to accumulate much more knowledge with. I love that part. This guy deserved to die. He was using a
Hey,
What can I do for you?
see if she had anything.
No problem.
yoink.
See if he had anything worth taking.
I'll get it done.
Heads up. Grab anything useful.
Certainly.
Heads up. Check it out.
I'll take care of it.
Holy.
Found the target again. Resistance is futile. Richards. If you find any spare parts, you be sure to let me know.
Look alive. Hold position.
I'd be happy to help. if I
Moving
can.
out. See if there's anything there.
No problem.
Take anything good.
Certainly.
Oh, that's a missile.
Look alive.
I'll take care of it.
Grab that.
I'll get it done.
Get that.
I'll get it done.
Pick that up.
No problem.
Take that.
I'll take care of it.
See if he had anything worth taking.
Certainly.
See if she had anything.
I'll take care of it.
Grab anything useful.
I'll get it done.
Check it out.
No problem.
See if there's anything there.
Certainly.
Take anything good.
Certainly.
Grab that.
I'll get it done.
Get that.
I'll take care of it.
Pick that up.
No problem.
Take that.
I'll take care of it.
There you go.
I hope you're buying.
Look alive.
Yes, sir.
Here.
Certainly.
Hey, Cleo.
Every weapon you see here could be the difference between life and death, baby.
Let's see what you have.
Purchase a variety in case...
Hey,
I'll get it done. Sure. Go ahead and take a look.
Cleo.
Don't worry. I only test the weapons on
Uh-huh. Sure.
a gun.
Hey.
Hope you find what you're looking for.
We're gonna make... We're gonna make so much money at this now.
What? I hear something. gonna be a good fight!
No more hiding for you.
Yo, grab anything useful.
Powering weapons.
Take anything good.
No problem. That was amazingly simple. We may have some trouble. Here, over here. Okay, sir. Done, sir.
Hey, see if he had anything worth taking.
Certainly.
See if she had anything. Grab anything useful.
No problem.
Check it out.
I'll get it done.
See if there's anything there.
I'll take care of it.
Take anything good.
I'll take care
Grab
of it.
that.
No problem.
Get that.
I'll get it done.
Pick that up.
Certainly.
Take that.
I'll take care
See
of
if she had anything.
I'll get it
Grab
done.
anything useful.
Certainly.
Check it out. See if there's anything there.
No problem.
Take anything good. Grab that.
I'll get it done.
Get that.
No problem.
Pick that up.
I'll take care
Take
of it.
that.
Certainly.
Yeah, you know what route we're going.
That's it.
We literally are exiting the building, damn it.
Your mama's so sweet. The dentist has her on
What the hell? Dude, one, two. Why did all of my jokes fall off? Dude, Rat King is such a good channel. I like this guy.
Great glowing day, Adams children. Welcome to this week's sermon, which is a retreatment of all the non-revolver pistols in the Fallout series. Kinda. Sorta. We examine the lore, the quirks, the real-life inspirations, and interesting behind-the-scenes information for this core group of Fallout weapons. If you think I missed one, check out my Revolvers of Fallout video. It is probably in there. Otherwise, I love seeing comments with really good information that I may have missed. So, crank up the rads and get ready to draw as we take a unique look at the pistols of Fallout. Let's start this list with one of the most well-known pistols in the entire
What the
Fallout
hell?
franchise. One that spans almost every single Fallout game to date, and see how it changes with each iteration. I went
That dude
back
is
and
like
forth about
straight up
including this one in my
dosing.
video on revolvers, because if you look closely at the in-game model of the 10mm pistol in the first Fallout, you can see a cylinder, one that would be loaded and cycled each time the trigger is pulled. However, as we will see, the 10mm will vary quite a bit in its design throughout the 10mm pistol. It is a very common weapon, being one of the weapons that the player will start with at the beginning of the first Fallout, stepping out into the cave, where you'll likely waste all your 10mm ammo, firing and missing at rats in a cave that we really should just be able to run past. Stupid friggin' rats. The pistol design does not look much like anything from the real world. However, it is an absolute one-for-one copy of a pistol that can be seen on the cover of a 1990s comic book miniseries called Hard Boiled. It really is a one-for-one, from the barrel shape to the cylinder, even to the kind of strange-looking brown grip-like part under the barrel. Doing between 5 and 12 damage with a decent magazine size and AP cost, this makes it a solid early game weapon, but it quickly falls behind many other weapons as the game progresses. It's also a very common weapon to find. You can encounter it in almost every area and by almost all groups except for the highest level ones like super mutants. What is interesting is that although it is very obviously a revolver, the weapon description very clearly states that the weapon auto-reloads after each shot until the magazine is empty. In the Fallout Bible, Volume 8, a fan asked why there seemed to be this discrepancy, and one of the Fallout designers, Chris Taylor, said that there was some miscommunication that led to the artwork and the item description mismatch, and the description was just never updated. The pistol shows up in Fallout 2 exactly as it does in the first Fallout. Same damage, very commonly found, it's all just more of the same really, and Fallout 2 doesn't really add anything new or interesting to the lore. Fallout Tactics completely skips the 10mm pistol, but the next time we see it is in full 3D glory in Fallout 3. Technically, this is a different model, perhaps an entirely different gun from the Colt in the first Fallouts, since it is called the N99, and except for the square and blocky shape, it doesn't really look all that similar either. Fallout 3's 10mm doesn't seem to pull inspiration strongly from any single real-world weapon. Although if we were forced to pick one, the slide, the part that moves back and forth while firing, is reminiscent of a Desert Eagle because of its shape, how large it is, and how similar it looks when it's in the open position. Why the pistol appears to be so front-heavy is unknown, and I find the small cylinder-looking thing on the very bottom to be very puzzling. The shape almost reminds me of a small CO2 cylinder, the kind used for paintball, airsoft, or something like that. I would really like to hear your best guess as to what this thing could be used for. A terminal in Fallout 3 gives us some background, telling us that the N99 was adopted as the military's standard issue pistol starting in 2051, when the older
Dude, that's weird. It's like,
pistol was picked
yeah,
out.
so weird how
And we
that,
don't know
like, it opens and that part slides open on Fallout 3.
I
That's
would kind of like to imagine that it was similar to the Colt 10mm pistol from the earlier Fallouts, just changed a bit to meet the military's requirements, and therefore given a new designation. That's headcanon, but that would tie things together pretty nicely. Apparently, the N99 was built well and with high quality materials because they are noted to be quite durable, and if any maintenance or restoration needs to be done, they are apparently easy to get working again. This is the reason why the 10mm is so common in the Capital Wasteland. Even after 200 years of use and neglect, that would come in the chaos of the post-war period. Doing 9 base damage, no extra critical damage, and having decent item health and magazine size, just like in the earlier Fallouts, it is a very useful weapon early on, but again, it just gets outclassed pretty quickly. Also, just like in Fallout 1, this can be the first actual firearm that the player can get from Amada as they are escaping Vault 101 at the end of Fallout 3's tutorial. Fallout 3 has a few unique variants that I find interesting. One less common variant can be found early on, creatively called the Silenced 10mm. A
Hey,
large
Myrna.
silencer is attached to the already chunky
Sure.
10mm,
Sure.
making it a suppress weapon. So killing an enemy with one hit will not alert nearby enemies, and it benefits by an increased number of sneak criticals. In exchange, it degrades more quickly and does 1 point less damage per shot. But this is
I got
very
this idea
useful
from
early
a
game
viewer. I don't
weapon
know
for
what the
stealth
name
builds,
was.
and can be found in several locations, but most notably is the weapon of choice for Mr. Burke, Tenpenny's slimy right-hand man who gets off on nuking Megaton. The other unique 10mm that is kind of attainable by the player is wielded by Colonel Autumn, one of the leaders of the Enclave in the DC area. Autumn can be seen carrying and
460
using
caps,
his
right?
10mm when the Enclave capture Project Purity, as well as at Raven Rock during Autumn's short-lived interrogation of the player character. The Fallout 3 official game guide says that the pistol is available as loot in the interrogation room at Raven Rock after the player is released by President Eden. This is false, but perhaps the pistol was meant to be found at this point in the game, because the very next time and last time that we see the good Colonel is when the Brotherhood retakes Project Purity, and he has replaced his 10mm with a laser pistol. The only way to get the pistol is
Dude, we can, then we can spy out.
Radiation blast with
Okay, shout out. I don't know who that streamer was, but yeah, shout out to them. And take all that junk and put it there.
You certainly know your way around a workbench.
Thank you. I'm out. When I get back, we're actually probably gonna... Hold on, shit.
Enclave takes Project Purity, where your dad dies and Autumn almost dies. If you go into third person and turn the camera around right next to the wall, you can get a search prompt to look through Autumn's inventory, and his pistol can be looted. His pistol is much better than any other 10mm variant.